little too much for today because I'm only supposed to teach you just one class period. So I thought I would pick something out of the War of 1812 that America fought against Great Britain or England, where the Queen lives, and give you some background of what we were doing. We had our third president in office. Our third president was named James Madison. And James Madison and his wife lived at the White House. The White House had just been built. It was not even finished yet. And these were the days where armies thought, if I capture your flag or your capital, I win. You ever play capture the flag? And you know, if you capture the other side's flag, it means you're the winner. Well, what better way to show the world they could beat America than to capture the house the president lives in? It was a great idea. So the British Army, they marched to Washington, D.C., and they set the White House on fire. Did you know it had burned? And it had to be rebuilt. It was made out of brick, but it had wood interior and wood, you know, on the eaves and around the windows. So it burned, and it burned it was ruined. James Madison was not at the White House when the British marched in. But what do we call the president's wife in our country? Does anybody know?
First Lady.
First Lady, very good. Dolly Madison was married to James Madison. And the First Lady kind of was the hostess of the White House. And she planned dinners and she made sure everything ran smoothly. Well, Dolly Madison was at the White House. And she got word that the British Army was marching to burn her house down. So Dolly Madison thought, ooh, I better get busy. I better help my country and my husband. So I'm going to read this little story about Dolly Madison. Dolly Madison saves George Washington.
Yeah.
Who is George Washington?
First president, his picture.
He was our first president. And there's a very famous portrait of George Washington that still hangs in our White House. In a minute, I'll pull it up on the whiteboard for you. It's very famous. It was painted by a man named Gilbert Sullivan. And Dolly Madison knew how important it was for America to remember what a great place we were and how proud we were of our democracy. So she will save this portrait. That is why it's still hanging in the White House today. And if you ever visit Washington, D.C., you can go see this portrait that she saved. So why don't y'all come sit on the rug, and I'm going to read you the story. No, leave your materials. We'll sit back down at the desk in a minute. Y'all come sit down on this beautiful rug, and we're going to read about Dolly Madison and what she does to help our country. Everybody talked about Dolly Madison. They talked about her charm and grace. They talked about her beauty, her stunning gowns, her beautiful banquets. Everybody loves Mrs. Madison. That's because Mrs. Madison loves everybody, they said. And Dolly Madison was known to be a real fancy dresser at the time. And she always wore lots of feathers. And she always had hats and things. She liked accessories. It was a surprising turn for the one-time farm girl, whose early years had not included grand parties and fancy clothes. Then she married James Madison in 1794 and joined the hectic political life. James Madison was a great man of the Revolution, a founding father. In the early days of the American Republic, he became President Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State. Jefferson, a widower with no wife of his own, enlisted Dolly to be something of his first lady and entertain politicians and foreign leaders. She threw wonderful dinner parties and even honored Lewis and Clark with a celebration before their dawning overland journey to the Pacific Ocean. Dolly became the capital's leading hostess. Dolly's reputation grew when James Madison became president in 1808. As the actual First Lady, she arranged weekly get-togethers called drawing rooms, she called them. Good-natured Dolly treated all her guests like family or long-lost friends, and she had a smile and a pleasant word for everybody. Her beautiful gowns and outrageous turbans of satin and gold and ostrich feathers dazzled all. Everyone ached to attend the drawing rooms. Despite the busy social world, Dolly still had the president's mansion to maintain. She saw a sore need for redecorating and threw herself to the task. Custom-made furniture, hand-woven carpet, and velvet curtains were carefully selected. In the dining room, she reserved a place for a remarkable life-size portrait of George Washington. The painting by the well-known artist Gilbert Stuart had been in the mansion since 1800. It portrayed the first president, not like a king, but as the country's leading private citizen, highlighting Americans' preference for democracy instead of royalty. The painting also showed the respect and love everyone had for Washington, feeling that Dolly surely shared. In fact, Washington was more than a war hero and a great statesman to Dolly. She was related to him through her sister's marriage to Washington's nephew. But in 1812, talk of Dolly's redecorating, her glamorous clothes, and her drawing rooms paled beside a bitter American and English quarrel. Each country felt the other meant it harm. So, who rules England? What does he wear?
He's a king.
He's a king. He wears a crown. And that's one reason America started as a democracy, because we vote on our people to rule us. And we had a very different idea about how countries should run. So here's the king. He says, you side with our enemies. And here is, who's this guy supposed to be?
American.
But what do we call Uncle Sam? Very good. You kidnap our sailors. So he's mad because England had been taking our sailors off of boats in the ocean, forcing them onto their boats and making them work as their sailors.
But Uncle Sam a real person?
No, he was just an image that used to fire people up, kind of like the storm. You know, the storm is supposed to be a tough thing on the football field. Well, that's Uncle Sam is supposed to represent us to the rest of the world. Finally, the arguments exploded into war. Battles blazed on land and sea. Then in 1814, Britain invaded America, and thousands of English soldiers stalked the Washington, D.C. countryside. Dolly's terrified friends all fled. Dolly did not. August 22nd found her with a spyglass in hand at the top window of the president's mansion, watching with unwearied anxiety for the president, her dear husband, in the field with his army. She later wrote that she saw only groups of military wandering in all directions, as if there were a lack of arms or the spirit to fight. So, whose flag is that?
American flag.
That's our flag. We call it Old Glory. Do you know what the English people call their flag? The Union Jack. That's what it's still called, the Union Jack. Suddenly, a dust-covered messenger on horseback galloped up to the president's house and warned that the British were near. The 100 soldiers that were supposed to be guarding the presidential mansion ran off. Were they brave? Not very brave. Dolly did not. Deserted by nearly everyone, Dolly must have had the good sense to run away, too. And who would expect otherwise from her? She was not a soldier, but a socialite, more familiar with the whistle of flutes than the whistle of bullets. But in that moment, she leapt to action, grabbing important government papers and other valuables to rescue. Then she remembered George Washington. Dolly refused to surrender the cherished painting to the sure destruction by the English soldiers. Delaying her escape, she commanded 2 servants to take the portrait down from the wall. They fumbled with the screws. Dolly ordered the frame broken. It's life size. It's really big. It's probably as tall as these walls. The men shattered the wood with a hatchet and freed the painting. 2 good citizens appeared, and Dolly instructed them to save that picture. Only then did she race for her safety. Dashing through the city, she met James, her husband, near the banks of the Potomac River. Before he returned to the fighting, the couple promised to reunite later at a distant tavern. The city of Washington burned, and flames lit the distant sky. Dolly took to the roads jammed with fleeing wagons and carts. Dolly made her way to the tavern, but instead of James, she found a crowd of outraged women who blamed the president for the fighting and destruction by the British. Your husband has got mine out fighting, they said. You shan't stay in this house, so get on out. Dolly retreated to another inn, arriving just as black thunder muttered, forth lightning flashed, and hurricane blasts announced a tornado which broke forth with a tropical fury. Disgusted as a simple farm woman, Dolly escaped to the countryside as the British ransacked Washington. She returned after several days, later saying, "I cannot tell you what I felt on re-entering the capital. Such destruction and such confusion. The British fleet full in view. At night the rockets were seen flying near us." She and James Madison reunited. They mourned the destruction of Washington, but took heart from an American victory at Baltimore Harbor in Maryland. An onlooker there, named Francis Scott Key, described the battle in person that would eventually become our national anthem. What is a national anthem? We sing it before every football game.
It's like the song that represents the United States flag.
That's exactly right. What song is it? The Star Spangled Banner. When people learned there was more to Dolly Madison than satin gowns and dainty cakes, they called her one of the bravest soldiers of the war. Months later, the British and Americans ended the war. The burned American president's mansion would be rebuilt, its charred sandstone walls painted white, prompting people to call it the White House. Dolly went on throwing more parties and met or befriended almost every important person in America's early history, including the first 11 presidents. She knew 11 presidents. That's amazing, because hardly anyone is alive who has lived in our country like your parents or grandparents through maybe 4 or 5 presidents. She knew the first 11. I mean, how awesome is that? It escaped the British and returned to the White House, where the painting remains on display today, just as Dolly would have wished it. Gilbert Stuart is the painter who painted this painting at the onset of the American Revolution. And he returned to America and painted the highest, brightest lights of politics and commerce. This painting was particularly important because it didn't show George Washington as a king. It showed him just as a president. Our president is just a citizen of our country. He's not royalty. He's just, it's just like you and me. But he leads our country, and of course George is one of our most famous American heroes. So, now, who is Dolly Madison? Raise your hand.
She did like one of the bravest people. She didn't run away. She saved the pictures and all this stuff.
That's right. She was very brave. What does a first lady do?
She plans the dinner parties and stuff.
She does. What do you think people thought about her after this war and she saved that painting? Back there, what do you think?
She was the bravest soldier.
They really thought she was as brave as any soldier. That's right. Okay, well let's go back to your desk, and we're going to talk about what it takes to be brave. And we can use historical fiction, and we can use fiction to talk about bravery. Now, this book is considered considered historic fiction? Because even though it's based on a true story, we don't know exactly what Dolly said. We don't know what her words were. You know, so so the author had to take a little, I don't know, some of his own thoughts and put in the story. What is an author? Do you know? The person who writes the story. Very good. What are illustrations?
Like pictures.
The pictures that help tell the story and make it more interesting. So these were, of course, drawn. It's like watercolor paintings on these pages. Let's go on now, and I'm going to talk about what it takes to be brave. And I'd like you to raise your hand and give me some adjectives. You know what an adjective is? An adjective is a describer. Like, I would say you're wearing a blue hat. The boy with the blue hat in summer school. That's describing you. And everybody in here would know you're the boy with the blue hat. So, let's talk about some things that describe being brave. Can you think of a word that describes being brave? I mean, brave is a good describer, too. We call it Dolly Madison a brave person. But what makes her brave?
Because she didn't run away from the White House and she saved all the portraits and people and stuff.
Very good. What else?
Tough.
Tough. She was pretty tough, huh? They said she was a farm girl when she was a little girl. She could have been from Concordia Parish. What else?
Thoughtful.
She was thoughtful. She was very thoughtful. It took her being thoughtful to think about cutting that painting and getting it out of there. Can you think of one? What about smart? Think she was smart? I think she probably was smart if she figured out at the last minute how to get some of our treasures out of the White House.
She was very helpful.
Helpful. She was very helpful. She's still helpful to our country because she saved one of the most important paintings we have. So, let me ask you a few other things about the War of 1812 and Dolly Madison. First of all, who won that war?
They did, because they were in the White House and then we came back and beat them.
Did they win the war or did they win the battle?
War.
If they won the war, we would be British citizens.
Battle.
They won just a battle when they burned the White House.
And then we came back and
That's right. And do you remember the man in New Orleans who helped end the war? He was also a president. He's on every $20 bill your parents used to buy you some hamburgers. Which president was that?
Thomas Jefferson.
Andrew Jackson. Have any of you ever visited New Orleans?
I have many times.
Well, in New Orleans, there's a fancy old church and a statue in the middle, in the front yard. And you know who that statue's of?
Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. So it's really important to Louisiana, too.
And I think it was in
Yes,
my
ma'am.
birthday, I'm going to New Orleans.
Well, you need to certainly go by Jackson Square. That's what they call it. And he is in the middle on a horse that's raised up. And because they consider him the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. It was just one of the battles in the War of 1812.
Mama.
You have something to say? No? All right, I want you to take these index cards that I've given you. And I want you to write on your cards people that you think are brave in your life. And then on the back of that card, I want you to tell me why they are brave. Now, you do not have to use complete sentences. You just can use descriptive words, okay? So take a few minutes and do that.
Oh, Mom's from New Orleans.
These cards you will turn in at the end of this lesson.